Hi, I'm Rachel here with my cat Leia, and I'm doing my final Sami Rohr video. Well, for fiction anyway, because 2013 is the last year I have left to do. But I do intend to come back ultimately and make videos for the non-fiction years. The Sami Rohr Prize is awarded by the Jewish Book Council annually to emerging Jewish writers. I've routinely taken the winner and two runners-up and reviewed their books here. You can find a link to my playlist down below. For 2013, I read 2 novels and 1 short story collection, and I find the short story collection to be the weakest. It's The Book of Life by Stuart Nadler, and it's 7 short stories, ostensibly about Jewish life. I say ostensibly because usually the text doesn't really support it. The level of Jewish history, culture, and religion covered in these stories are exceptionally thin, even when rabbis are involved. Much of said Jewish content revolves around Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women, and then simply stating that identity is a personal identifier when the relationships start to go south. I didn't feel anything for most of these relationships either. Nadler is one of those authors who didn't really impress me while attempting to create 3-dimensional female characters. But his use of language was MFA strong, and I particularly liked his ability to evoke the physicality of his settings. All of his stories took place on the Upper East Coast of the United States, mostly in New York City. And one story did particularly stick out to me. In The Moon Landing, Nadler probes his protagonist's estrangement from his family after his parents suddenly die. He's a recovering alcoholic who only recently obtained financial security, and now he's packing up the house with his assertive and successful younger brother, a lawyer. The relationship tensions just pop for me. Amongst this, a childhood memory gets tied to one of those hidden mementos in the closet, and it lends a little insight into his mother's hidden desires. I found it to be moving, so at the end of the day, I'm glad I read this collection. The other 2 books are much stronger contenders for me, though they both did have a major element that gave me pause. I think I'll start with the Sami Rohr winner, The Innocents by Francesca Siegel. The book is a retelling of Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence. So to recap the original, in 1870s New York, Newland Archer, a well-to-do lawyer, is eagerly awaiting his marriage to the beautiful and innocent May Welland. But then May's cousin, the Countess Ellen Olenska, comes back to town in the throes of a scandalous divorce. Newland is dispatched to urge her to stop this behavior, but it's his own values that change as Ellen's cosmopolitan life gives him a look into a world of less restrictive social mores. He falls in love with her, and despite going through with his marriage, maybe the 2 of them are about to come to some sort of arrangement, but suddenly Ellen hurries back to Europe. Turns out that May is pregnant, and she's shrewd enough to tell Ellen immediately. Now to skip over to The Innocents. In a modern-day London Jewish suburb of Temple Fortune, Adam Newman, a well-to-do lawyer, is eagerly awaiting his marriage to the beautiful and innocent Rachel Gilbert. But then Rachel's cousin Ellie Schneider comes back to town in the throes of a scandalous tabloid affair. Adam is dispatched to be her counsel should she be dragged into the divorce proceedings between her rich benefactor and his wife. But with Ellie, he senses a larger world than the one he lives in with his prescripted life in New Fortune, along with everyone he's known since nursery school. So the love triangle thing happens, and he gets married, and then he's thinking of leaving his wife before Ellie abruptly hurries back to New York. Turns out that Rachel is pregnant, and you know the rest. The big problem is that I never really bought the Adam-Ellie love story. I kind of see how Adam could build Ellie up as a manic pixie dream girl of sorts, though he was also quite patronizing with her at times. Though I couldn't really see what would draw Ellie to him, at least sexually speaking. I think the bigger problem has to do with social conventions. Temple Fortune, despite some conservative attitudes, is a lot more open and accepting than 1870s New York. Wharton's setting lends itself to some of those coy relationships that just can't be replicated in Siegel's work. But I think Siegel thrived in realizing the intent of Wharton's novel, to be a wry social commentary. When Siegel broke away from the source material, she created a fascinating content for her characters. The Gilbert family in particular is defined by cosmopolitan Jewish sensibilities. Grandmother Ziva was a Holocaust survivor who first moved to Israel where her children were born, and then Ellie's mother died in a homicide bombing. Later, business takes the family to the UK, where Ziva's daughter Yaffa and granddaughter Rachel mold themselves into English society ladies around town. Ziva's own surreal experiences influence her general acceptance of her granddaughter Ellie's more unconventional ways. Adam is particularly drawn to the Gilbert family, not just because of his long romance with Rachel, but because he lost his own father at a very young age, and Rachel's father is a mentor to him. And Ellie and Rachel both struggle with jealousy about how the other cousin fits into the family. Plus, there's a handful of supporting characters as well. The ending is also a bit different than the original, and I think it fits this story better. Siegel probes Temple Fortune's shortcomings, but also its charms. And I think in general, we can all relate to getting bored or feeling trapped by our lives. But chasing after dreams has its own consequences too. And finally, I'll talk about what I think is my favorite of the bunch. The People of Forever Are Not Afraid by Sami Rohr. These are essentially interconnected short stories about 3 Israeli schoolgirls in modern times, before, during, and after army service. Yael, Avishag, and Leah come from a small border town near Lebanon, which in and of itself is fraught with social commentary. The girls come from at least partial Mizrahi families, aka Jewish families of Middle Eastern descent, who were more or less shunted off into less desirable parts of Israel by Ashkenazi or Eastern European Jews. In the titular story, and The People of Forever Are Not Afraid, Avishag's father broils in angry resentment about this history, while his daughter, disquietingly, deals with mental depression. The townsfolk also have skirmishes with nearby Arabs, and in The Opposite of Memory, Yael witnesses a classmate's mother be brutally murdered. A few years later, Yael is sent to a base to train male soldiers in how to fire guns. Avishag is guarding the Egyptian border, and Leah has a job at a checkpoint in the West Bank, until a violent altercation in checkpoint propels her to train to become an officer. Through Boyanju's blunt prose, we get a look into how military training and that mindset permeates these girls' lives, along with far more recognizable things to Western teenagers, like dealing with the tides of boredom and insecurity and sexual relations. More than any other book I've read, I think this showcases the strange Israeli Bildungsroman of graduating high school and being handed a gun and asked to defend your country. We also, directly or indirectly, get to see through the eyes of Sudanese refugees, Egyptian border guards, trafficked European sex slaves, and beleaguered Palestinians. Mashing all of this together builds into a genuinely explored theme. Violence, warfare, and distrust are corrupting. They tend to screw people up. Things were moving along rather smoothly, relatively speaking, until the final 2 stories, which take place after the girls' service. I think with these particular plots, Boyanju moves beyond using razor-sharp violence as a commentary and goes straight into shock value. They were way too over the top and didn't really work for me. This would probably be a good time to warn that this book indeed covers a lot of physical and emotional abuse, though the language is never graphic. Overall, I think this is a haunting read about a very relevant situation in the world, and particularly how it affects 3 standard Israeli girls. That about covers it for me. You can find links to my longer written reviews down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.